Welcome to Nutmeg Nation with Carleen Humphrey.
Hi, I'm Carleen. This is Nutmeg Nation. I am here on Zoom with Grace, and she is the creator of Jamaica Magazine. We're talking about this hurricane.
So I was saying that with the recent Hurricane Beryl going through the Caribbean, a couple of things came back to me while that was going on. One is a personal story where I remember I was living in Kingston on the waterfront, so overlooking the harbor, and I had an apartment that had sliding glass doors, a balcony, etc. And being sort of new to the whole hurricane thing, because I'd left Jamaica so long, I didn't put a barrier or board up the sliding glass doors or anything. So when the hurricane was coming, my son and we decided to go down to a lower floor. We were on the 9th floor. And sort of hunker down in the hallway with some friends. So we were there for a while. And then when the eye of the hurricane came, so it was kind of calm, we went back up to my apartment. And at first I thought, oh, there's nothing. This is fine. And then I realized, very strangely enough, the sliding glass doors, the glass of the two sides of the sliding glass doors, had completely been removed. There was no shattered glass. There was absolutely zero in the apartment, on the balcony, or in the pool below. The two panes of glass from the glass doors were just gone. To this day, I wonder about the science behind that.
Like the hurricane hit so fast and so quickly that it shattered the glass. Like the amount of...
It didn't shatter it because there were no splinters.
Oh, so when you say no splinters,
There were no pieces of glass. There were no shards of glass. There was nothing. I know. It takes a while to get you to think about it.
Like in terms of gravitational pull, when there's a hurricane and the pressure is so strong.
Charlene, I don't even know what the science is. The only thing someone could mention to me, I had only recently moved into that apartment. Mm-hmm. I bought it. And somebody said maybe the glass panes, at least one or both of them, maybe they had at the very top some kind of separation from the frame. And maybe if the wind came in and got behind it. But I am telling you, to this day, no shards of glass, no splinters, no nothing.
Yeah, that's like a miracle.
It was a miracle. And then obviously I waited on the second half of the hurricane came. And so we left, came back up, and the only damage or the only thing was the wind had blown some of the rain to about a third of the way into the apartment. So the flooring was wet, and that was it.
And what year? When was this? When did this happen?
Oh my gosh. This would have been 2006.
Yeah, because it's been a long time since Jamaica's had a hurricane, right?
Yeah, I think it might have been Hurricane Ivan. I don't remember. But worse than that was I remember working at the Gleaner and being on the news desk. And again, hurricane season, and a story came over the wires about Haiti, which is always a tragedy when tropical storms or a hurricane goes through Haiti.
Yeah.
So I remember on the wire coming across a story about a father. It was tropical storm had passed through Haiti, and he was looking for the bodies of his children because a lot of people had been swept away, had died in the tropical storm. It wasn't even a hurricane. And his story is when the reporters spoke to him, the story over the wire said that the waters came and he had one child in each arm. And the surge was so strong, he knew he would not have been able to save both of them. And he couldn't figure out which one to let go. So he let go both of them.
I'm like flabbergasted. I don't even know what to say to that. It's like,
it was the saddest thing I ever read.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. When the reporter saw him, he was then looking for the bodies of his children.
So you said you saw the story in the Gleaner?
No, I was working at the Gleaner. And as one of the editors, we have access to stories that come over the newswire.
Right.
And so being on the desk, I was watching and reading stories coming over the newswire about this tropical storm that had passed through Haiti, and hence came across that particular story that talked about this man looking for his two children.
Yeah.
But the tragedy with Haiti, the deforestation, it's so deforested that it doesn't take much for devastation in terms of the water and the wind that's caused. And in this case, it wasn't even a hurricane, it was a tropical storm.
Okay.
Those are the two things that came to mind in terms of this hurricane that just went through the Caribbean.
That just hit me. Like having having to decide in a tropical storm, like which child you're gonna hang on to. That's probably like the hardest decision any parent has to make.
Well, that's why he said he couldn't decide. He said he knew he couldn't save both of them, but he couldn't decide which one he would save. So he let go of both of them.
And it's like, why both? But it's hard either way. I think if any parent has to choose one child over the other, it's still hard. Like when you choose one and if you held on to one and let the other one go,
Yeah, I didn't even bother questioning it. I just thought to myself, how devastating that must have been. He said he knew he just would not have been able to hold on to the two of them. It was not possible. The surge of the water and where they were, he didn't have the strength and the wherewithal to save two of them. Yeah. Anyway,
it's very sad. It's that, and I mean, that's a tragic story to read over the wire. It doesn't matter how you put it. Yeah, I know.
Sorry to start that way, but but that's part of the story of the Caribbean, isn't it?
Well, even now, I just followed up. I mean, talking about the Caribbean, and this shows about Grenada firsthand, but I think it's important to talk about the Caribbean as a whole because we all have a story to tell, and we all feel the impact. The Hurricane Beryl that happened in Grenada, it also hit Grenada and Jamaica, and I don't know what's happening now. I haven't been following things because there's so much happening in the world and life, and things are always happening, right? So do what we can. But yeah, you're here to tell your story. I mean, obviously, you're talking about your experience with living back home and experiencing a hurricane itself. You know what I mean? And so it's obviously bringing back those memories, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's only in going back that I realized, and I went back 1998 until 2009, really, that I realized just the whole devastation of hurricanes, because I left when I was sufficiently young enough that, yes, I had experienced must have, but it didn't, that having the responsibility to cope as an adult, I didn't have that when I was young and living there. But going back and then also working in the media, you get to see and read stories like the one I just told you about the hurricane and the impact that it can have.
But I think as someone who went to school for English, I studied English, and first I studied professional writing, and then I went into English. But hearing you talk about being in the media, and I think this is the reason why you created this magazine, from what I remember in our previous conversation, is that you had an idea when you were working at Gleaner. Yeah.
Well, right. When I was at the Gleaner, I was one of the editors. I was a lifestyle editor. And under my desk, the lifestyle desk, we had several sections. And the food section, which was weekly, it was one of the sections that I had responsibility for. And when I took it over, the food section every Thursday was basically, full of just grocery and food specials for the week, so to speak. And so we decided to take it and make it a real food section, talking about the food, the people, recipes, the whole thing that made it a lifestyle section. And people responded to that. It was amazing, the response. I mean, I would be driving into work from the country where I lived at one point, and on a Thursday morning, seeing these guys sitting on the bridge or the side of the road reading the food section. And in addition to that, the diaspora, because the Gleaner got online and got, in terms of digital publication and digital outreach, they were very early on that. And so the diaspora responded very positively to the food section, as well as many of the other sections, but the food section. And so it was a good thing. I knew that the circulation for the Thursday paper, because the food section came out on a Thursday, increased. So it was all good. So that is what got me into thinking about a food magazine. And I actually proposed that to the senior people at the Gleaner, because I kind of had no intention, or the thought had not occurred to me to do my own thing. So I approached the senior manager of advertising and talked it through, and they went away, thought about it, and came back and said something to the effect of, well, what if it doesn't work? And I was so blown away because the response was so great that I thought, how could it not work? And the Gleaner had the infrastructure overseas, I thought, to make it work. And so that's what gave me the idea that a Jamaican food magazine was not really existing and that there was a niche, there was a place for it.
Okay, so they said, what if it didn't work? And is that only reason that they gave you for not taking you up on the idea? Like they wouldn't invest in it? Like it was just too much of a risk at that time? Like
I have no clue. I just remember the comment was, what if it didn't work? Which blew me away because it had already been proven how popular that section was and how much people wanted to get in it, and that the circulation had grown, and that specifically the diaspora was responding to it in numbers in positive ways.
And when did this happen?
This would have been the mid, like 2005.
Okay.
It would have happened around then, yeah.
I mean, as someone who's been writing for a long time, like at that time in media, like how was it working for a newspaper at that point? Like I think it's not like 2008 when the stock market crashed where they're like, oh, they're worried about losing money. You know what I mean? Investments. Like this was a very prominent newspaper that you were working for at the time.
I didn't really bother myself in thinking too much about that. I know that the Gleaner was, and most likely still is, the largest media house in the Caribbean, with offices at the time, and I think still now, in London and Toronto and New York and so on. So that's what I meant when I proposed the idea. It wasn't just on a whim. It wasn't just that people overseas were responding. It's also that the Gleaner had the infrastructure, in my mind or my understanding of things, to make it happen. Once they said that, I didn't bother myself too much to ponder and think about their thing and their reasoning. Yeah. That would be a waste of my time and energy. But the idea did occur to me that I could look at doing my own.
Yeah. And so what was the push? What motivated you to go and work on this on your own? It takes like passion. Like, what drove you to do this?
Well, I mean, it was such a pleasure working on the food section. The food section was part of my responsibility. We also had a Saturday lifestyle section. We had a Monday pullout section called, forget what it was called, but mainly aimed towards women, although men read it as well. And the youth section. So I had 4 sections that came under my responsibility, plus special projects. What I found out about the food section, and I only knew this or learned this working on it, was how much food was not just about eating or recipe. What people were responding to in the food section were the stories that we were telling around food, the people in food, the connections that you make through food, the connections that you make when you break bread together. And for me, the storyteller in me responded to that. That's where I saw the possibilities. So while recipes were a part of it, it wasn't so much or just about recipe. It was about the story of food, who grew it, who cooked it, what's the history, the culture, the coming together, all of that around food. Yeah. And Jamaican cuisine, that's what struck me. It also, for me, I realized quickly in the process that this was a way, again, as a storyteller, that's where I come at it from. It was a way of telling our story in our own way, in our own voice, using food as the media. Our stories have been and are being told through music and sport, which is absolutely amazing. But this is just another way of telling our story and of who we are. And I will say quickly, at the very beginning, a few people said to me, why call it Jamaican Eid? Why not call it Caribbean Eid? So I want to address that right away. I did think about that, but I felt that I didn't have the authority to call it Caribbean Eats because I did not have that intrinsic understanding of the Caribbean that I would want. It wouldn't have felt authentic to me because the Caribbean is not a monolith. We're very similar.
Okay, so when you say monolith, you elaborate on that for those that are not very well versed in the English language as you are. You know what I mean? Like that.
Monolith meaning that we're not just one blob. We're not just one big old thing.
Yeah.
We have similarities and we are sisters and brothers or whatever you want to call it. But there's the Eastern Caribbean, the Northern, the Southern, the whatever, the English speaking, the French speaking, the Dutch speaking, the Spanish speaking, et cetera, et cetera. And there's sufficient differences that I wanted to respect that, not to lump us all into one, and to be addressing it in a way that I couldn't feel it. In Jamaica, although I had lived away for quite a while and moved back, I felt an intrinsic understanding that I could present whatever I was doing authentically, where I didn't have that with the rest of the Caribbean. So my thought was to have it Jamaican Eats and then invite whenever, wherever, and as often as possible, the participation and contribution and content from other islands and countries in the Caribbean.
You know, I understand that. I mean, because in order to do something well, you have to be well versed in it, or you have to have an idea, like, you know, start with the idea or have knowledge of it somewhat. Like, not that you know everything about Jamaican or recipes or stories, but you are a storyteller and you're telling your story. The eyes of other will create Jamaican dishes. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people love Jamaican cuisine and they're always looking for somewhere new to go. Like, I mean, right now it's summertime. And so it's all about the food festival and, carnival's coming up. You have Jamaica Day coming up, all the things that, bring people together through food. Like when you're, what do you call it? When you're having a gathering, it's usually, they say people, when you invite others, it's like there's food involved.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Again, I didn't just start out just to give recipes. It was about telling the story of Jamaica, our culture through food. So it was about food and culture. And I had an intrinsic understanding of Jamaica. And let me point out, had I not gone back to Jamaica to live and work, if I had not gone back and had that experience, I don't think I could have done it authentically. Because having left in my early teens and coming to Toronto and growing up here, I didn't have that connection again until I went back and worked. And I think specifically worked in the Gleaner. That's what brought me to that place of that intrinsic understanding, that where I felt that I could go ahead and tell our stories in that way.
It's very interesting that you say that, because this show here, Nutmeg Nation, I had this idea because I've had a lot of girls say things about Grenada. Grenada's a small island. People don't know it exists. You hear all the negative ideas that people have. And I created this. I thought of this idea to educate the world on Grenada. Like you said, the Caribbean it might be too broad. It's hard. It's definitely, you'd have to have who are well versed in the Caribbean different parts of the Caribbean, different countries, in order for it to work as you call it, Caribbean. But where I relate to you, what you're saying in my expertise, that I am not well versed in Grenada. And when someone said to me, I had someone on the show a few months back, and she was like, why did you create this show? You don't even live in Grenada. Like, you're not here. You're not part of the culture. And she has a point there. I have more of a background in Canadian culture than in Grenadian culture. But for me, this idea was important because I feel like to leave a mark on the world however possible, even if I'm educating myself and others and learning as I go. And I think you have a different...
Yeah, what I would say to that, I don't think you have to be in the country or the island to be able to whatever. You tell your story in your own way as it applies to your experience. The way you would tell the story or stories may be different from somebody who tells a story, who lives there and who's always lived there. And that's fine. There are many different voices. There's absolutely, as a matter of fact, I was going to say there's nothing wrong with that. Let me change that. There's everything right about that. We're not just one story people. We have many stories. So there's absolutely everything right about that. It only amplifies our voices when we can do that. So I don't think there's anything wrong if you tell your story from your point of view and your understanding of it. I just think it's important that we tell our stories in our way that is positive, uplifting, and elevating. Because when others tell our stories for us, it tends not to be as positive or as uplifting. Where others may see struggles and whatever and so on. Yes, there may be that, but I also see it as Jamaicans, and I would say Caribbean people in general, as being very resilient and offering a lot to the world. That's how I would tell our stories. Other people may choose to tell our stories for us from the point of view of victimhood.
Well, it's very telling. Like you said, we have to tell our story our way or how we interpret it. And for me, I born in Grenada. I left when I was very young, but I've always been connected to my family there. And they say it's not where you're going, it's where you came from. And that, Grenada is a part of who I am, like the culture, there
Right.
Grenada is a very beautiful place. And the same thing with Jamaica. Like, you know what I mean? That, like you said, when we talked about this before, it's our Caribbean story. And it's nice to talk to other people from the Caribbean who have a story to tell, because I can tell with you, there's so much passion. Like, it's just, I could feel it, even though we're on Zoom. You are so strong. Grace, I'm telling you, you know what I mean? It's the passion, the desire, determination to create what you've created. And if they hadn't said no, then it might not have happened. Never know in life. There's
Exactly.
a reason why it happened, and you have a story to tell. Going back, what I want to ask you though, from the beginning, if we go back to the beginning, where you were born in Jamaica, how did you start off, growing up? Where did you?
So I was born in Kingston and I left in my early teens. For those who it matters to, I went to Arden High School for a couple of years before I moved to Toronto. But I knew from the beginning that I was always into writing. I was always writing. I was that kid in the neighborhood who would also give other kids spelling tests. When I ran out of books to read, I read the dictionary. I was always writing and thought I would be writing. It was that was just me. So I knew who I was from the very beginning. So going into journalism here, having come to Toronto and attended high school here, then going to what was then Ryerson into the journalism program, that was like a natural for me. So that is my formal background then in terms of writing and communications and so on. And I stayed in Toronto and did some amount of writing and journalism work and whatever, but decided to go back to in Toronto, did that for a while. I actually went to Jamaica twice.
But when you were in Toronto, where did you start off your writing career?
I was in Toronto just after graduating from Ryerson journalism program. I actually moved to Jamaica in the mid to late 70s and worked for 2 years. This was before the last move. So I made 2 different moves back to Jamaica. I worked 1 year for what was the Daily News, the Jamaica Daily News, I think it was called, for 1 year, and worked for a radio station for 1 year. And then came back to Toronto, was in Toronto, took on running a neighborhood newspaper called the Ward 7 News that had been started and that had been running by the former mayor, John Sewell. I took that over and ran it. We changed the name over to the Cabbagetown Riverdale News, so it gives you an idea of where in Toronto it was. Did that for a while and then gave it up, and then had various communications role for various companies in Toronto, and then I decided to move to Vancouver. So there's a lot of moving. Lived and worked in Vancouver for a while.
Yeah.
And then in the beginning of 1998, decided I would go back to Jamaica and live and work for a while.
Oh, wow.
And it was in that second move back to Jamaica where I was working at the Gleaner that I then also started Jamaican Eats magazine. Yeah.
And how did you fund the magazine? I remember as we look back, it's always getting the ball rolling, getting everything started. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Supporting you, no?
Well, yes, that's always a struggle. I made all the classic mistakes that one does, printing too many copies too early on and so on. But I also had advertisers. I'm going to mention her name, Zayn Issa, as one example from, I think it's Super Clubs, who was very supportive, as well as a number of other investors who advertised in the magazine. So I had a number of that. I quickly had subscribers as well in various countries because I'd done survey friends and family about what did they think of such a magazine, and the word spread in that way. So that was how I did it, and just bootstrapped it wherever I could and hung in there and kept it going.
So now with the way of the world, everything's going digital. And so many of your subscribers can, subscribe online, read the magazine online or order it and get, the paper copy, right? So.
Right. Well, okay. So I came back to Canada, went to Vancouver in 2009 and kept the magazine going, which was very tricky because, yes, at that time, the world started to change in terms of digital, in terms of 2008, 2009, the rough economy. And I did try, I think, in 2010 or so to go fully digital, and the readers just were not having it. And I remember that I kept going until 2012 when I started a bakery or took over a bakery in Vancouver and decided that I couldn't do both that and the magazine. And so I suspended the magazine in 2012. And at the time, I kind of was thinking of not bringing it back, I would give it up. But at that time, Facebook was just becoming a thing. And I had signed up the magazine Facebook. Didn't even really know what I was doing. I just remember somebody said, oh, you should have a Facebook page or group or something. So I did that. And what that did in 2012 onward, readers who had joined and who kept joining the Facebook group or page, whichever it was, would not go away, and they wouldn't leave me alone. I would get messages like, Miss Grace or Grace, we'll wait for you. We're still waiting for you. There were people who had subscribed, and I kept saying, I'll send you back your subscription money. We're not talking about a lot of money, but nevertheless. And they go, no, we don't want it back. Keep it because we know you're coming back. And finally, when I closed the bakery in 2015.
What was the name of the bakery?
The bakery was called Joyce Bakery. So in 2015, when I got sufficient enough messages saying, Grace, when are you going to start again? We're waiting for you. I decided to take a look at the new world of publishing to see how it might be possible to come back, because I knew that I couldn't go back to publishing the way that I used to pre-2009, and discovered that given the rise of digital printing, not online non-paper, but digital printing, where printing was made more accessible and affordable, that indeed it's something that I could do. So I investigated that and then decided to restart or continue the magazine from 20.
And I guess it seems like the resurgence, like starting Facebook, like social media in a way, brought the community together to get you back to,
it did
Jamaican
get people to harass me.
They're like, Grace, we're waiting. If we have to pour in the money, we'll get the whole community to endorse you to help get back on your feet again, to get this started. Because at the end of the day, you need some funds to get this, even if it's digital versus,
Well, I don't want to romanticize it.
Of course not romanticizing it. But when you're an entrepreneur, like you need a little bit, even if it's like $100. Like some people start off with less, but
you need that. You need a lot of people who are willing to contribute, not just money, but in so many ways. You need a lot of people who are just rooting for you. You need so many. And if I say nothing else, let me stop here and say, I am so eternally grateful to so many people who not only subscribe, they got gift subscriptions for other people. They sent messages of support. They are rooting for me and so on and so forth. They contribute in so many ways in terms of recipes and stories and ideas and just moral support. Thank you for saying that, because it's been absolutely amazing. And I don't know that without that I could have started and/or would have continued. So that has been absolutely amazing, because the world of publishing is tough. But I find that although there is a digital magazine that people can subscribe to and/or buy, most people want the paper magazine, because I think when it comes comes to certain subject matter, you want the paper, you want to see the pictures, you want to go to it whenever and wherever you want. And also keep in mind, if the magazine was only about some jerk chicken recipe, then who cares? You can go online and find that. But because you can read the stories that resonate with people, that's why people come, not to simply get some rest, because these days you can search around and you can find that. So people come to get the stories. They want to read about other people. They want to see what other people are doing. They want the tidbits, the history, the culture. They want to see the way that Jamaican and Caribbean food connect with the rest of the world. And that's what's them coming back.
Yeah. You know what? It's a beautiful thing. It's like you said, people can relate to a story. That's what keeps them coming back. It's the stories. It's that story of that chef, like how it came to be. You know what I mean? Like for you, as someone who created the team, the people that helped make magazine, what story over the years stands out in your mind? I'm sure there's more than one, but if you could say,
oh my goodness.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know. Well, this is a period of time to talk about it. I remember we did on several occasions, but we did stuff around the Olympics, and those editions tended to be very popular. And in fact, in 2016, actually led to a cookbook that I produced called 10 Reasons Why Jamaicans Run So Fast. And again,
there we go. Another, you know what? Speaking, let me stop you for a second. You know, the Olympics coming up, it's very exciting. I'm glad you brought that up. It's always been the back and forth between Jamaica and the U.S., especially when we're looking at the 100-meter dash.
Yeah.
Same boat, you know. I digress. I'm changing the subject here. But going back to food, I mean, food is important for sustenance, for everything overall. But, you know.
Yeah. But you know what? What that did, number one, I was prompted to write that book with contributions from many different chefs and cooks, I must say, that are clearly identified in the book. But number one, it was prompted because people kept asking me, why do Jamaicans run so fast? Because I hadn't really thought about it. But I thought about it, talked to a number of people, and basically put something together that, again, didn't just have recipes, but spoke to the culture. And some of it was funny, or maybe not so funny, but even things like spoke to the culture where we could say, well, you know, the reason why Usain Bolt and people in that part of the island or in the countryside run so fast, they're used to outrunning the duppies or the goats. So they had to learn to run fast. And what helped them was the yam that, you know. So we got to tell stories about who we are. We got to tell story about the Sarasa tea that you would have to drink at the end of the summer going back to school. And that was part of what fueled you, you know, cleaned out your system and all of that. Whether it's true or not, that was part of our culture and part of the way we grew up. So again, it allowed the whole thing without being scientific, because there's absolutely no claim about this being scientific, for us to tell anecdotal stories, for us to talk about the culture and how we grew up and who we are. And then add to that stories of people and recipes to it, so that if somebody should buy that book, they may never ever cook anything, but they read the story. They may read the story of the 105-year-old woman who said she's lived that long because of XYZ. There is that story in there, you know? So again, it's about the storytelling. And again, it's about us presenting ourselves in a light that's positive and uplifting. Because, you know, that is a part of my mission, is to elevate and celebrate Jamaican and Caribbean food and culture.
I think that the most important thing is leaving an impact. And I think
legacy.
And when you talked about the community forming on Facebook and saying that they're going to wait, that means that you left an impact. When you stopped writing for a while, you took a break. You know, we all need a break in life. Sometimes things happen. So, but when people ask about something like Jamaican Eats, the magazine that you started, and they're looking for more issues to come out because you've done something good. And
yeah. If I can also add that when I moved back to Toronto in 2017, I added to that storytelling in a different way, in that I started organizing Caribbean themed events in Toronto, which is almost like a living magazine, but through events as opposed to the pages of a magazine. And so, for example, I've done several times an event called Caribbean Board Games and Brunch.
I remember the last event they had a few months back in the winter. Yeah, in January. And I was watching some of the footage of the event. And I wish I was there because it did bring a lot to that event too, with music and contests. And like you said, it's like a live experience.
That particular event was called Jamaica in January.
Right.
And I had done it during the pandemic once as a virtual event. And for the first time this year, 2024 January, did it in person, live. And it was extremely well received and very well attended. And also, let me say, it drew a diverse crowd. So the diversity is something else. So it drew Jamaican and Caribbean people from all walks, but it also draws, just like the magazine readership, people who just have an interest in things Jamaican or things Caribbean. So people are invited to come to the table no matter who you are. It's just that we're in charge of telling the stories because it's our story, So we get a diversity of people at these events as well as the readership of the magazine. But again, we're telling our stories. And it's in a way that's celebratory, And when we make fun, we can poke fun at ourselves, but it's in our own way.
Thank you for listening to Nutmeg Nation with Carleen Humphrey.